I played 70 board games that were released this year, and today I want to tell you about my favorites. These are the best board games of 2024. If you want to buy them, there are links below. The older I get, the more I appreciate my games being short and sweet. In my 20s, I could waste 6 hours on a bad game of Battlestar Galactica and not question my mortality. But now, if I've got 6 hours free, it's because it's midnight and I should go to bed. Chronologic is my new favorite deduction game, and it's not because it's the quickest and easiest to set up deduction game I've ever played. Yes, I've searched for Planet X, decrypted the cryptid, and cringed at some awkward guests, but none of them can hold a candle to Chronologic. And if they could hold a candle, I might actually have some use for them. This is how quick it is to teach. There are 6 characters in the Paris Opera House. Every hour, they will always move to an adjacent room. You've got to find out when the victim is in a room with one other character. That's when he was poisoned. To win, you need to say who killed him, in which room, and at what time. Every turn, you will pick a room and combine it with a character or time period to get some information. This is private info for yourself, and this is public info you should read out loud. Stop the timer. And it's just as quick to play. I can do a case of Chronologic in the time it takes for you to set up awkward guess. It's not as deep or complicated, but that's exactly what I want. I find heavy deduction games start to feel like doing maths homework. Here, I get the same thrill of trying to work it out first, but it never drags. I know for some people, the cases not being replayable is blasphemy, but for me, it's an appeal. Not every game needs to stay in my collection forever. Again, my time is precious, so I'm delighted to free some up for a new experience. I was so short on time last year that without thinking, I bought some sun cream from a website I'd never used before. I was trying to maintain my basement nerd aesthetic, and you could probably tell from my rich tan that I never got that sun cream or saw that money again. I wish that I'd been using today's sponsor, NordVPN, which now protects you from scam websites with its Threat Protection Pro feature. You know what it's like, you're desperate to buy a game that's out of stock everywhere, except for on one weird looking website. With NordVPN, if you visit a site that's known for scamming people, it will tell you, "John, don't trust this website.
But this is the only place I can buy D-Day Monopoly.
Don't be stupid.
I'd rather be stupid than sad.
If you get scammed, you'll be both."
Oh, fine.
You get that, plus the world's fastest VPN, which lets you change your IP address when you're browsing online so you can protect yourself from online trackers, and access the internet as if you're in another country.
Gee golly, I'd sure like to watch some of your moving pictures.
Ugh, shut up. And if you sign up today at nordvpn.com/actualo, you'll get 4 months extra. There's a link in the description below. And if you don't like it, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. Thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Every year now, it seems, Reinoso releases a new tile-laying game that is slightly different from his others, because people like me will buy it anyway. Through the Desert, Blue Lagoon, Babylonia, Havilandi, Cascadero, and it's almost as if they're taking the piss out of us with this new one because it's called Rebirth. And it's a baby that looks a lot like its grandfather's. The world has collapsed because you bought too much plastic on Kickstarter, and we must start again by rebuilding Scotland. Sure. Every turn, you place a tile on the map anywhere you like, which at the start is a paralyzing freedom as you try to work out what's best to do. But the more the board fills up, you'll know exactly where you want to go. If you add to a farm, you'll score points for every tile in that group, which can get very juicy. So you'll try to bulge into any free space before the other players block you off. But you also want to place next to castles, which are a battle to surround them the most to win them, and you want to place next to cathedrals to get secret objective cards. You basically want to do everything right now. Have your fingers in all the pies, in true Scottish fashion. But you've turned up late to the buffet, and as you reach for a pork pie, someone else grabs the last sausage roll. You haven't got time to grieve, you need to move on and adapt. What's the next best way to fill your plate? There's no Marmite pinwheels either? Move on and adapt. Fine, some Twiglets will do. I love the competition. It's not a knife fight in a phone booth, it's a buffet in a bothy. You can't move for other players ruining your plans, and that's how I like my games. I don't love the secret objectives. They feel very un-Knizian, especially getting them late on when they're now impossible to complete. You can solve that by playing on the other side of the board in Ireland, which uses public objectives, but even they don't feel quite right because there's so many of them. Rebirth is on the deeper end of this family of games, over with Babylonia and Cascadero. And I prefer it to both of those because the simpler turns means it moves quicker and it's much more intuitive to teach and pick up. But it's like choosing your favourite child. They're all brilliant games. But they're so similar, I would rather save some room on my shelf for a completely different experience. With Rebirth, Knizia shows that the seed is still strong, but how many more do we need? It might be time for him to get the snip. Daybreak was actually released last year, but I didn't play it then because I didn't think I'd like it, and I shouldn't. It's got very little player interaction and lots of engine building, two things I don't typically like in games. It's a cooperative game about trying to save the world from runaway climate change. You each play as a major world power, and you're trying to reduce your carbon emissions to stop the global temperature from rising. And I really like that theme, but in the same way that I like eating spinach because I know it's good for me, or watching an Oscar-winning film about someone with Alzheimer's. I know by the end I'll think it was brilliant, but after a long day, I just want to watch a comedy. But when I played it, I actually found the theme to be really positive. You start off in a bad situation. As China, you're producing loads of dirty energy, but everything you do is working to improve that. You build wind farms to generate clean energy. You create walkable cities to lower your fuel emissions. Every single card in the game is a positive step towards turning this around. My whole life I've been told about the importance of tackling climate change, and it's been miserable watching government after government never do enough. But here's a game that puts you at the wheel and presents you with all these options. And sure, you might still get it wrong, but at least you'll do something. I find that really appealing. Like playing Football Manager and proving that Southampton can win the Premier League, if I was in charge. The game is in these cards. These are your projects, like high-speed rail, plant-rich diets, ocean fertilization. You're trying to find the best way to use them to fix your problems. You each have 5 columns to play these cards in. These are your engines. If I want my people to use less electricity, I could start a degrowth movement, playing this card onto a column. And if that column has 5 society tags, it makes it even better. So another thing I can do is to add a card behind just for its tags. And that's how easy it is. You can play any card to any column, either on top to use its action, or behind to help bolster an action you already have. You don't have to spend money or actions to add a card, you just do it. I actually found this quite confusing when I first played it. What do you mean I can just do what I want? Don't I have a certain number of actions? It's alien to have this amount of freedom, and there's so many paths you can take, which gives this feeling of possibility and hope. But it also means you will get lost in the puzzle trying to find the best way to use them. And this is my issue with engine building games. To me, they're navel gazing, that spending minutes alone in thought is antisocial. And Daybreak isn't immune to that criticism. It's far more isolating than 95% of cooperative games. You're not working on a shared engine, you each have your own, and you seldom have the chance to even swap cards. But the key difference for me is that rather than taking ages on my turn trying to win the game for myself, I'm contributing to the team. All that navel gazing has a greater purpose. My navel might just save the world. Daybreak's genius is it manages to condense complex ideas into a manageable game. If you're not making enough energy, then your communities will go into crisis, and if they're in crisis, you'll have less time to be able to fix things, so you get less cards to use. It's a much more detailed simulation than, say, Pandemic, which makes it look far more scary and complicated than it is. This isn't like Robinson Crusoe where you'll be checking the rulebook half the time. It's intuitive, you learn it once, and then you'll know what you're doing. It's not the action film that Pandemic is. This is a more cerebral, strategic cooperative game. But in the end, that fits. We're not going to save the world by running around at the last minute. We're going to save it by putting our heads together and making a plan. Well, not in this timeline, but that's how it's going in my Daybreak universe. And over there, I'm basically Mr. Beast. This is Inori, and every year I find myself talking about a game that looks so unappealing, I can feel you switching off. If I can be your dad for just a second, I know this cauliflower doesn't look like it'll be nice, but if you just give it a chance, it will taste good. Okay, maybe cauliflower was a bad example. The theme, let's just rip it off like a plaster, is we're making offerings to spirits to become the guardian of the great tree. Done. I don't know who that theme is for, but whoever it is, I don't think we can be friends. It seems like this would be a cozy puzzle game with zero interaction for people who own Himalayan salt lamps. But Inori is far from that. It's got bite and tension, and once I closed my eyes, it was one of the best games I played this year. If you strip it back, you're placing out workers on these cards to collect resources, which is all very familiar. But what makes the game different is how you score. The cards will only pay out points if every spot is taken by a worker. If it's not complete, you get nothing. It creates this reluctant teamwork. You barely have enough workers to fill one card yourself, so you need the other players to help you finish them off. You need some friends to join your pyramid scheme so you can both get rich off it. Except the card only scores points for that color of resource, so if no one else is collecting red, they won't join you because they don't want you to score. Or maybe they will, because this spot on the red card gives them 2 yellows which they need elsewhere, so you end up helping each other by accident. You think you're being selfish, defecating on their lawn, but you've actually helped fertilize their rose bush. If a card isn't finished, it not only doesn't score, it will change color for the next round. Now you've got nowhere to score your reds because it's turned blue. It's such a simple premise, but it's so exciting trying to anticipate where people will go and watch on desperate for your cards to be finished. It feels like a classic German game from the early 2000s. Simple rules, quick turns, and loads of player interaction. For a light, fun family game, nothing comes close to Captain Flip this year, which manages to stand out from the crowd by doing one cool thing that's so important to the game that it's in the title. In Captain Flip, you flip your tiles. On your turn, you draw a tile from the bag to add a crewmate to your pirate ship. Let's say you draw the cook, who gives you 1 point for every character in its row, but right now that's useless, so you flip him and get a gunner instead. On the other side of every tile is a different character, but you don't know which one. If you think you can do better, you can flip it over, but once you do, you're stuck with it. There's no going back. You can't sack someone then ask them to come back because their replacement is even worse. And that's exactly what I told your boss when they called me in tears. It's a brilliant dilemma that makes every turn exciting. Is the grass still greener on the other side when you can't see it? That depends on your personality. Some players will flip every tile, assuming it can always get better, whereas others are much happier to deal with the devil they can see. Like the gunner, he will give you 5 points when he turns up, but if you have 3 gunners at the end of the game, you can't win. So the fear every time you flip a tile is you'll get another gunner and forfeit the game. But it's not over till it's over. If you get a monkey and place it next to a gunner, you can flip it over. But what if the bag doesn't give you a monkey? And where you place a tile is really important too. The deckhand will only score points if there's no gunner in the same row or column as it. I love that the more ambitious you get, the harder it is to pull it off without something going wrong. I really like the swabby, which you're trying to get in every column. And it's worth so many points to have 6 of them that by the end, you'll be recklessly flipping every tile to get 7 extra points. In essence, you're working on your own thing, but I find it's still a social game because it's fun watching everyone else take their turn and be the devil on their shoulder, trying to convince them to flip and ruin their board. It's so quick to teach, so smooth to play, and just such a likable experience. I could really see this one joining the ranks of Sushi Go and Las Vegas as an intro game for absolutely anyone. I had a lot of fun playing Medical Mysteries this year. Well, not that much because there's only 4 cases in the box, but when I was playing it, I was loving it. As I was reading the introduction to the first case, people were already shouting out what they think the patient has. Oh, she's breathing too fast, then it must be this, or I've seen this episode of House that's exactly like this. We're like the hospital porters gossiping in the corner, thinking we know better than the doctors. The game gives you the freedom to start however you want, and because we've convinced ourselves that she's definitely got this, the consensus was to skip the pointless diagnostic checks that will just confirm what we already know and get straight to treatment. More than once in this game, we started cutting them open before we had all the information. But don't worry, the game will mark you down for that. It's partly the game's fault. You only have limited time to work with, and every 3 hours your patient's situation will develop. the game gives you an update. So if you think they're bleeding internally, you're worried that if you don't fix that before the next update, something's going to go terribly wrong. It's not that punishing, but you don't know that at the time. The first two cases are on the easier side. We had them cracked pretty quickly, but I still enjoyed the journey, whereas the second two are much more involved and the level you'd want. Like an episode of House, you're really struggling to find the right diagnosis. Medical Mysteries was practically made for me. I've always wanted a game about diagnosing patients, but I wasn't sure it could ever really work and be fun. They've done a really good job of making it feel real and still have it be an interesting challenge. I only wish there was more content, but I do think it's worth the price and look forward to more boxes. Fractured Sky is a game so aggressively overproduced that I have to take an antihistamine every time I play it so my body won't reject it. It used to be that a monstrous Kickstarter box was nature's way of warding off intelligent creatures from the poison that lies within, but now there are so many of these beasts that, by cosmic accident, some of them turn out to be good. And that's the problem with Fractured Sky. It's not just good, it's streamlined and straightforward and all the things you would never have guessed it would be. And it fills a hole in my collection because it's a kind of game that I've always wanted on my shelves. One of trying to win regions by sending out your troops with a good dose of secrecy and intrigue. Here is your map. There are 10 lands to fight over, but you've only got 3 airships to send out. When you place an airship, it carries a hidden number with it. And at the end of the round, they get revealed and you work out who wins each region. And it carries that token using magnets, which are admittedly very cool, but let's not get carried away. In this family, we like simple board games with wooden pieces. Yes, you do pick up the chip from your player tray. Yes, I suppose I've never seen anything quite like it in board games either, but please, we must get back to the gameplay. That's all that matters. Now drink your Huel dinner and be quiet. You can only spend 10 strength per round, so it's up to you how to divide it. Do you go big in one area or try to spread it out and get even more? That depends what you're after. To win the game, we're collecting these starfalls. Don't ask me to explain the theme. Not because I don't want to, I couldn't if I tried. I also don't want to. And the starfalls will appear in certain lands at the end of the round, determined by these secret cards. So imagine that 3 gold bars have been dropped in the UK. You could go to Newcastle or Manchester and hope it will be there, or you can spend some resources to find out one of them is in Slough and head there. Any sane individual will know there's no reason to go to Slough unless there's definitely a gold bar there. So as soon as you act, you're giving away that information. Or are you? It could be a bluff to throw them off the real scent. You're constantly trying to read what other players are doing to get an edge. And it makes for a really tense experience because you don't know anything for certain until the final reveal when you find out what you've won. Even if there isn't a starfall, the winner of a region will get some resources from the land, and this is where the game gets deeper. You can use those to give you an edge, spend them to peek at secret mission cards so you know where to go, or to build markets or fortresses which will give you an advantage in certain lands. Every mechanism comes together to deliver this fun, interactive, exciting game. This version is the deluxe Kickstarter version, which is way too big and way too expensive for any game. So I'd recommend the retail version instead. You won't get the magnets, but you also won't get a coffin for a large rabbit. So lose-lose, I guess. Marabunta is a 2-player game in which you play as rival ants, at war with each other over a picnic blanket. Which is cute because it's a silly thing to fight over, not like fossil fuels or religion. The picnic blanket is divided into regions which you're trying to control, but to be able to get your ants in a region, you need the right dice. And that's where things get tricky. Each round you roll the dice and one of you decides how to divide them into 2 piles. Imagine you're sharing a sandwich with your worst enemy. You don't want to give them a crumb more than they deserve, so you have to cut it straight down the middle. If you make one side bigger, they're going to take that one because they get to pick first. But how do you make it even when all the dice are different? It's like trying to decide whether you want the ham and the tomato or the cheese and the lettuce. You have this naive belief that if you cut it just right with that shiny cherry on top to distract them, you can trick them into taking the weaker half. But they're on high alert to your chicanery, and sometimes they'll ignore the cherry just to teach you a lesson. Like a dog offended that you covered their medicine in peanut butter. Don't tell me what I want. You don't know me. I contain multitudes. And just to guarantee you'll never cut it exactly in half, the game throws in a bonus tile each round, so someone's always getting a smaller pile. When you get your dice, you write those numbers onto the map in their coloured regions. You have to expand out from your existing units, which means placement is everything, because you can block your opponent from expanding by creating a wall of your ants. Or try to reach these cupcakes to score bonus points, and the crates which give you special abilities. It's my kind of two-player game where you can't ever walk straight because the other player is elbowing you trying to walk the same footpath. I love that with every decision you have to think about what they're gonna do. It's like living in a tiny village with your annoying ex. You'll let them have the good coffee shop if you can keep the yoga class. But who are you kidding? A tiny village doesn't have a good coffee shop. Skyrise is an auction game with a very special twist, that what you're bidding on changes every time you bid on it. You play as architects trying to build skyscrapers across the city, and it's those skyscrapers that you bid with because they have numbers on them. You start an auction by placing one where you want to build, but for the next player to outbid you, they will have to place a higher number on an adjacent spot. So they're not bidding to win your spot, they would win this new one instead. It's like having an auctioneer who's easily distracted. We have 50, any advance on 50 for the painting, 60 for this lovely vase. It's such an interesting situation to wrap your head around. In every other auction game, you're bidding on the same thing, deciding how much you want it. Here you've got to constantly adjust. How much do I want these new things? And when placing a bid, you've got to keep an eye on what you're making available for the next player. If it's by a bridge or a lake, it's more valuable because of these public goals. And when you do think a spot is perfect, you can dispense with the foreplay and place your highest building to guarantee it's yours. When you win a space, you also collect the token on it, which helps you score more points for that type of region. So you're trying to get the tokens that beef up what your buildings are worth, and the buildings that suit your tokens. It's such a simple system that makes you desperately want certain spots, and makes it really easy to read what your opponents need. And like in my favourite auction game, Ra, you can see what bidding numbers they all have, and try to make it really difficult for them by making them pay so much extra to outbid you that they get cold feet. That's what I love about auction games, trying to get in your opponent's heads, work out how much they're willing to spend. And that's what Skyrise is all about. Plus, it gives you those human moments where someone goes nuts and splurges their best tower on something just because they're getting antsy. And the spatial auction is so clever. Like, if you run out of spaces to place a bid, the auction just ends and the last bidder gets it, which makes for some really interesting moments, especially towards the end. Skyrise was on Kickstarter with a silly, massive plastic version for the FOMO warriors. Not warriors, warriors. What are you saying? I'm saying warriors. But I really appreciate that they made the retail version with nice wooden pieces in a normal sized box. It's intersectional consumerism. And hey, I prefer my depictions of capitalist dystopias to be biodegradable, so in 1,000 years, there's no evidence I contributed to our downfall. 2 years ago, Foundations of Rome was my 4th favourite game of the year, but it was way too big and way too expensive, so I personally requested a smaller cardboard version of it. And 2 years on, they've made Foundations of Metropolis, especially for me, because they think I'm cool. This is a game we needed. Finally, a city building game where you're building the same city. My house is next to your coffee shop and your school is benefiting from my apartment complex. That's how cities work, it's symbiotic. If loads of commercial buildings are popping up, then you'll try to open your market next door. So when that plot of land goes up for sale, you'll jump in and buy it. But when it enters the market, it's pricey. It'll come down if you wait, but this is prime real estate. Someone else could buy it first. Instead of buying, you can build on land you already own. The more lots you own next to each other, the bigger the building you can place. So again, it feels like life or death when a plot comes up next to where you already own. To get the lots you need, you'll need lots of cash. You can spend your turn to collect income, and the more commercial buildings you have, the more money you'll get. So you need to build them first before you collect the money. But wait, the plot you need is up for sale. You need to buy that, but you haven't collected money yet. Like living in a big city, there's a frenetic pace that you can never keep up with. I love how competitive it is. You're buying land that the other players want. Plus, there's a fight to build the most housing to get the bonus. And it's tough to carve out a big enough space for these residential buildings. I'm glad they were able to keep the player boards in this version because they make the game so easy to follow. When you've built something, the empty space tells you how many points or dollars it pays out. It's the same brilliant game as Foundations of Rome, but now it comes in a normal size box for a reasonable price. This is how the game should have come to the market originally, because I can take it to game night without giving myself a hernia. It doesn't go to 5 players or have any of the expansion content, but you don't need that stuff. You need a game that you can actually get to the table, physically, and still afford the rent this month. Those are my top 10 board games of 2024. If you want to buy any of them, there are links below. To see my next 10 favourites from last year, I've made an exclusive video for my patrons and YouTube members, which you can watch right now if you sign up. And remember, you can get 4 months extra on a NordVPN subscription by using the link in the description below. I'm John Perkis, thanks for watching.